A lot of people think that if you want to be successful, you have to work all the time, grind as hard as you can, and put in as many hours as you possibly can, more than the other person. But the reality is while yes, you do have to work hard and you will have to put in more work than other people, what's way more important to be productive and to be successful in life is the quality of the work that you have, not the quantity. In this video, we're going to be talking about how you can maximize that quantity of work, because when it comes down to being productive and productivity culture as a whole, the entire goal and the main purpose of productivity culture is to help you understand how to maximize the quality of your work so that you can have a lower quantity of work and spend more time enjoying your life and doing the things that you love. The reason for this is twofold. Of course, we want to be able to lower the amount of time that we do doing work so that we can have a more fulfilling, enjoyable life and have more autonomy over our lives. But another big reason that's often underlooked is the fact that past 40 or 50 hours, we actually don't get that much more done. There's a study I'm going to pop up on screen that talks about this, but there's been research done on the fact that past 40 hours, our amount of work that we can actually get done starts to decline. At a certain point, increasing the amount of work that we do actually results in negative productivity, meaning that we get less and less done as we add more and more hours past a certain point. Keeping in mind that we have a limited amount of work that we can achieve within a given day, we want to maximize that limited amount of work as much as possible so that we can fulfill our dreams and our goals and our aspirations and have a good time and an enjoyable life while doing it. How do we do that? We're going to be talking about this in kind of two parts in this video. In the first part, we're going to be focusing on practical kind of tips you can do in the moment, and we're going to dive into the mindset that you want to get into if you want to be more productive. And in the second part, we're going to talk about long-term things that you can kind of do in order to increase your productivity in the long run. So let's dive into the first part, which is the practical tip section. So this section is going to be broken up into two parts again. And the two parts that we're going to be focusing on is kind of the two core principles of being productive in the moment. One is the fact that you actually want to be focused on the thing that you're doing. You want to give the thing that you're doing all your attention. So we're going to be going over practical tips on how to be focused, but it's not just enough to be focused. You want to be focused on the right things, because if you're not focused on the right things, then you can be really productive and get some stuff done, but it might not be in the right direction. So the second part of the practical tip section will focus on how to actually focus on the right things. And again, both of these go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. If you're focusing really well, but it's on all the wrong things, then you're not going to get much done and you're not going to be very productive. On the other hand, if you have all the right goals, but you aren't focusing on them deeply and doing, deep work, which we'll talk about, then you're not going to get anything done as well. So we need to have both of these pieces here. So let's dive into the first part, which is going to be on how do you focus a little bit better. Now, this part of the video is pretty straightforward. What we're basically going to be focusing on is kind of four main techniques or things that you can do. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is deep work. I highly recommend you check out Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, if you haven't already. It's a super good book that talks about essentially this concept of deep work. What he basically talks about in this book is that there are two kinds of work we can do. There's deep work and then there's shallow work. Shallow work is when you do things like answering emails, busy work, doing chores, stuff like that. Stuff that's, kind of important and that kind of needs to get done, but it doesn't really require a lot of mental effort or focus. And it oftentimes doesn't really move the needle in terms of making progress on important goals. But deep work is the opposite. Deep work is where you're working really hard, you're really focused, there's minimal distractions, and the work that you do is the most impactful for moving you in the right direction towards the goals that you have. So we want to maximize our deep work. We want to do as much deep work as we can possible. Keep in mind that with deep work, you can't really do more than about 4 hours in a day. That's kind of the limit that you're going to hit. But if you can work up to 2 hours or 3 hours a day even, you'll be surprised at how much you can get done within one deep work session compared to the entire day. So what is deep work and how do we really activate it and get into it? The first thing that you have to do is eliminate distractions. When you're doing deep work, you need to be alone. You preferably need to have music off, although people, if you work better with music, you can keep it on. You need to have no emails, no phone, nothing like that. It needs to be complete peace, quiet, and calm, and you need to be working on one specific thing. The idea is to get into the flow state. I'm going to pop up a book here on the flow state. The flow state is basically when you're completely kind of in Zen. You're completely locked in on something and you lose track of time. And you want to achieve that state as often as possible. And again, the biggest thing you have to do is no distractions. You cannot check your email, you cannot check your phone, you can't check anything at all. You want to just focus on the actual objective you're doing. Now, if you're in a job that kind of requires you to, constantly be on or like have Slack on all the time or have Outlook open, or if you have a lot of meetings, we'll kind of discuss a technique I like to use in order to manage that in the next section. But this is kind of the ideas of deep work, is you want to have very undistracted time where you work on stuff. And the other part of it, which we're going to kind of dive into the second part of the video, is having really focused, narrow goals that you can focus on. You want the stuff that you do within your deep work sessions to be the most impactful stuff possible. You don't really want to waste any time in your deep work sessions working on frivolous stuff. You want to make sure before you go into a deep work session that you have an idea of a kind of clear, consistent goals that you want to accomplish that'll move the needle forward the most in terms of making progress on the goals that you want to achieve. So that's kind of an overview, a summary of deep work and how that will help you, gain more productivity. A kind of case example of this, right, is if we look at kind of writing an essay. So with writing an essay, there's lots of different stuff that you actually need to do. Like, for example, a whole big part of essay stuff is actually just formatting the essay. This is pretty easy stuff, like where you have all your references, you need to convert them into the right format. Maybe you need to take your essay and put it into LaTeX, stuff like that. This stuff is important and you need to do it, but it's not necessarily the most mentally consuming thing. Maybe if it's your first or second time doing it, it can be kind of mentally consuming, but it's not too bad. The actual formatting part of the essay is pretty easy, but the hard part is the actual research, diving into things, and being able to create a high quality paper. So when you go into your deep work session, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have some kind of goal in mind for how much you want to complete with the essay, and you want to make sure it's something that contributes the most to actually achieving the goal of writing the essay. So you don't want to focus on kind of frivolous stuff like formatting or contacting professors to ask about certain resources, or maybe reaching out to a librarian. That stuff you want to save for outside of the deep work session to prepare for it. In the actual deep work session, what you would want to do is set a goal to write maybe 2 pages of the essay. And the goals you set in your deep work session, which we'll kind of go over in the second part, which focuses on setting the right goals, you want to make sure you set goals that are really aggressive for your deep work session. So you want to make sure that they're kind of time bound, right? So again, we're going to discuss this in the next couple of tips, but if you have a 50-minute deep work session, within that session, you want to set a goal that's really ambitious. So if it typically takes you about, an hour to write a page, try and write a page and a half in those 50 minutes. You want to push yourself in deep work. You want to really get locked in and in the zone, and you want to be just outside what you think is possible. That's going to be where you actually enter that flow state. You need some level of challenge, and deep work needs to be a little exhausting. After a deep work session, you won't really be able to do another deep work session, or you'll be able to do them, but you'll need to recharge a little bit. So that's kind of the basics on deep work. You can check out Cal Newport's book for more kind of specifics on deep work, and the next couple of tips we're talking about all will feed back into this core idea of deep work, but that's kind of an outline or an introduction. The next thing that we're going to be diving into is the Pomodoro technique, or in general, using time blocking and management in order to manage your productivity and manage your deep focused kind of work. And the Pomodoro technique is the one I'm discussing specifically because it has a lot of really important, crucial elements when it comes to time blocking that a lot of other time blocking techniques don't really have. Let's dive into the Pomodoro technique. So with the Pomodoro technique, let me explain it first, and then I'll go into why it's so effective. And once you understand why it's effective, you can kind of use those principles to build your own version of it, or adopt other productivity techniques and principles throughout your day-to-day life. So the Pomodoro technique basically works like this. You work for 25 minutes, you take a 5-minute break, right? Then you do this again 2 more times, right? And then for the 4th and final time, you again do another 25-minute block, but this time you take a 15 to 20-minute break instead of a 5-minute break. And then you just rinse and repeat and do that over and over. So pretty simple technique, right? And during those 25 minutes until your 15 to 20-minute break, you should ideally have no phones, no emails, nothing like that. Just be focused on your work. So this is very conducive for deep work. But here's the thing I love about Pomodoros. The 5-minute breaks that you have are actually extremely essential. You need to take the full 5-minute break. And the reason that you should do this is because what the Pomodoro technique basically does is it taps into kind of 2 modes of thinking that our brain has. I'll pop up a book on screen here that kind of dives into the type 1 and type 2 brain, but I'm going to explain it very simply here. The book is called Thinking Fast and Slow. The way that it basically works is you have a type 1 brain. Your type 1 brain really is good at logical kind of tasks. When you're solving a math problem, when you're reading a book, you're trying to understand it in the moment, you're using your type 1 kind of brain, or at least I'm going to refer to it as type 1. Type 1 is really good at complex, logical, kind of analytical tasks, and that's the thing that you use when you're thinking really hard about stuff in the moment. But our type 2 brain is our kind of subconscious brain, right? And the book Rest, also an amazing book, I'm going to pop it up on screen, talks about this a lot. Our subconscious brain, which I'm going to refer to in this video as our type 2 brain, actually does a lot of the thinking behind the scenes. Our type 2 brain is kind of one that's underappreciated, right? Let's say that you're working on a hard math problem, right? And then you can't figure it out, and so you step away and then you go to sleep, and the next morning you wake up and you just know the answer to that math problem, right? Even though you weren't working on it while you were sleeping. The thing is, you actually are working on stuff when you're taking rest. Whenever you do any kind of work, right, with your type 1 logical brain, and then you take a break and you step away from it, your subconscious mind continues to work on it. Your type 2 brain continues to kind of work on it in the background. And that brain is extremely important and is really, really good at solving a lot of problems. That's why oftentimes a good night's sleep, taking some rest, or having some leisure time helps you solve difficult problems, because your type 1 brain kind of runs out of fuel really quickly and it can't do a lot of really higher complex thinking. But your type 2 brain in the background is able to process way more information. That's why shower thoughts are such a big common thing is because the shower is typically the one place where we can't have technology and we're taking like true leisure breaks, and that's where our type 2 brain is the most active for most of us in the modern day. So how does this tie into the Pomodoro technique? Well, the Pomodoro technique takes advantage of both of these methods of thinking, right? During your 25 minutes on, you're gonna be really focused and you're using your type 1 brain, you're thinking about the problem really hard and you're deeply focusing, which we need to do if we wanna be able to solve problems. But then during the 5-minute breaks when you step away, again, because you're only stepping away for a little bit, you're not really engaging in a lot of other distractions, your brain continues to work on the problem in the background and your type 2 brain can kind of come alive and do what it does best. Solve problems using much more higher order levels of thinking that we can't really have access to when we're just using our type 1 brain. And so when you take 25 minutes on and you take that 5 minutes off, in those 5 minutes, you're going to be working on the problem still. And then when you come back to it, you'll feel a little bit more refreshed. It also helps you to not burn out as much because you can have quick snacks during those. You can have bathroom breaks, stuff like that in those 5-minute breaks. And it'll help you to stay productive and not get fatigued and tired and study for much longer periods of time. The Pomodoro technique is also super useful for integrating it with kind of deep work because again, it helps you stay focused. It helps you stay consistent for a long period of time. And also it helps you to kind of block out specific amounts of time for your deep work a lot more easily. And this is also where it gets easier to schedule in deep work between meetings and stuff like that. Because these Pomodoro sessions are pretty short. They're just 25 minutes for one session and then a 5-minute break. Right, so it becomes easy to just do 2 quick Pomodoro sessions real quick, or just to do, 4, have a little 2-hour block in your calendar where no one can schedule meetings and you can get a lot done that way. It's a perfect productivity technique, especially if you have a lot of meetings and stuff that disrupts your day. The next 2 tips kind of tie into each other, but they're extremely valuable. One of them is using apps like Freedom. I'm going to pop it up right here. There's a ton of apps that you can use to like block email and stuff like that on your computer because it's really easy to get tempted by distractions and stuff like that, but using an app like Freedom or something can really drastically help you lower the amount of distractions that you have. And also putting away your phone, putting it on do not disturb using custom focus settings. This is a pretty straightforward tip, but I feel like I need to include it in there because it's super important. The final kind of part we're going to focus on for, actually focusing on your work is working in a place where there aren't many distractions. Like don't work with your friends if you're in college, or if you're at work, don't work with distracting coworkers. You preferably want to like not really work with people at all, but sometimes you can find people you gel well with and do deep work with. But the other thing is don't work in distracting areas, right? A lot of people, for me especially, I'm in college and I'll work in my dorm a lot, but it's really easy for me to get distracted in my dorm because in my dorm I have my TV, I have all my gaming consoles, I have a ton of stuff in here that can distract me, I have my guitar. It's really easy for me to get off track. But if I go to some place like the library or something like that, and if I go alone, if I go to a coffee shop, what's great about that is you kind of are forced to work. Like you can't really do much else besides work. And if you use an app like Freedom to block distracting apps when you're out there, you really only have the choice to do work. So it really forces you to focus as much as you can on the task at hand. So that's another kind of quick 2 tips is, using Freedom, blocking stuff, and then not working with friends and going to places where you won't be distracted as easily because there's not much to get distracted by. So that's part 1 of the practical tip section. Just to sum it up, basically you want to focus on deep work. You want to focus on using things like the Pomodoro technique or using something similar to the Pomodoro technique. You can also do like 45 minutes, 15-minute breaks, 90 minutes, 15-minute breaks, lots of different ways to break it up. You want to focus on using things like Freedom.2 and, avoid distractions and your cell phone and stuff like that. And then the final tip is going to be, don't really work with friends, don't work with people who are distracting you, and try and go out when you work. And when you go out, you'll kind of be forced to focus on the thing that you're doing because there's nothing else to distract you. So now let's dive into part 2 of the practical tip section of this kind of video where we focusing on the right goals. So the number 1 law that I can actually recommend that really has helped me focus on the right goals is Parkinson's law. Parkinson's law basically states that the amount of time that you allot to complete a task is how long that task will take to be completed. So for example, if you have an essay and it's due in 2 weeks, you'll take 2 weeks to get it done. However, if you have an essay and it's due in 2 days, you'll get it done in 2 days. Parkinson's law is really helpful and it doesn't immediately seem clear why, but the thing is, if you look at a lot of our goals and if you look at the reason why a lot of people don't make progress on a lot of their goals, it's because the amount of time that they give themselves is way too big. If you give yourself like a month, a week, it doesn't really matter. You'll end up finishing in the last couple of days anyway. That's when you'll make most of the progress, is in the last leg of the time that you have given yourself in order to complete the task. So we can take advantage of Parkinson's law by basically just looking at all of our tasks and then asking ourselves, how would I get this done if I only had a week to do this thing? Or if I only had a day to do this thing? A good rule of thumb is to take the amount of time that you have been given to complete a task and then divide it by 4. So if you have a month, ask yourself, how would I complete this thing in a week? If you have 4 days, ask yourself, how would I complete this within a day? And when you do that, you'll become much more aware of what you actually need to get done and what progress you need to make in order to complete things faster. So for example, if we again look at like writing an essay, right? What'll happen a lot of the times is that people will be writing like an essay and they'll spend, let's say you have a month to do it, right? They'll spend like the first 2 weeks just kind of doing research research, poking around at the subject, kind of getting an idea of what they want to do. Then they'll kind of write an outline for a little bit, and then they'll start writing the first few pages, maybe they'll start writing the first couple of paragraphs, and then within the last week is actually when most of the writing will happen. So what we can do is, if we use Parkinson's law, again, take a month and shorten it down into just 1 week. What you can do instead is really hyper focus on the most important things that you need to do, not worry too much about the kind of frivolous things that we kind of just do to procrastinate. We're being productive, but really we're just procrastinating and wasting a lot of time. So for the essay, right, what you can do is you can kind of dive straight into the outline from the get-go, understand the layout of the paper on the first day, and kind of from that jump into research. And on the second day, do a ton of research. Maybe on the third day too, do a lot of research, get all of your sources together and put them into the outline. And then you can spend the final 4 days writing. That is a much more efficient, quick, organized schedule than the kind of first schedule that we had over the course of that month, where you take a little bit of time, you kind of meander, go slow, and you don't really think about what it is exactly that you're doing. And this is also, again, if we think about deep work, this is super conducive to deep work, because when you have a really precise thing that you need to get done, it's going to be hard to get it done, and you don't have a lot of time to do it. It'll force you to really focus on the most effective things possible and really get in the zone. So Parkinson's law pairs really well with the Pareto principle as well. The Pareto principle basically states, it's like the 80-20 rule. It states that 80% of our results come from 20% of the effort. The Pareto principle is most easily seen in things like learning musical instruments, right? If you look at guitar, if you know about 8 chords on the guitar, you can play like most songs, and again, with piano too, if you know how to play 4 chords, you can play along to a ton of different songs, right? There's even a TED talk of this guy who talks about learning ukulele. He learned 4 chords and he could play like 80 different songs using those 4 chords, because they're a really common chord progression. So that's why you really want to hyper focus on the things that are most important in moving progress. And again, if you think about tasks like, let's do an essay again for an example. An essay, the most important thing that you actually need to get done is writing, right? You need to actually write stuff down. You need to actually make progress in terms of writing more stuff. So if you focus on the writing and on getting out as many words as you possibly can that are of high quality, that's how you're going to be making progress, right? Or if you're writing a research paper, or if you need to do something like a literature review, you want to focus as much as you can on getting as many sources as you possibly can and understanding them well quickly. When we kind of use these two principles in conjunction with each other, Parkinson's law and the Pareto principle, Parkinson's law will kind of shorten the amount of time that we spent on doing things and will lower our amount of procrastination. And then the Pareto principle will kind of help us hone in on the limited time that we now have using Parkinson's law. So again, if we have that kind of essay, or let's say we have some kind of like a programming assignment or something like that, what we'll do is we'll really hyper focus on these exact things that we need to get done in order to create it within a much shorter amount of time. And again, this will free up a lot of free time for us, because we won't be spending lots of time procrastinating and doing aimless work. Everything we do will be really focused and to the point, and it'll help us move forward much more quickly in life and in our goals and our progress. The last two kind of things that we can focus on, again, that kind of tie into each other, are to-do lists and prioritization. As you're going to see, all of these things kind of feed into each other, right? So if you have to-do lists, the reason that to-do lists are so helpful is because they help you prioritize. And again, prioritization can happen when you use things like the Pareto principle and Parkinson's law. So let's dive into to-do lists and prioritization. One of the biggest reasons that people aren't really productive is because they don't know how to prioritize, right? Again, they'll spend a lot of their time on frivolous stuff. And again, if we think about Parkinson's law, again, it ties into this a lot, because with Parkinson's law, if you give yourself too much time to do something, if you're over ambitious with the amount of time you give yourself, you're not going to focus on the most important things, and you're going to prioritize fruitless, kind of useless things. But if you drastically shorten the window that you have to do something, it'll force you to prioritize really effectively. And a great way to prioritize is using to-do lists. Right? You want to take all the tasks that you kind of have, break them down into little small chunks, and the chunks that you break them down into need to be the most effective things in moving towards completion of that task. So again, for example, with an essay, like a task that you need to complete for the essay might need to be something like writing the first paragraph or doing a literature review and finding 5 sources, right? It needs to be specific stuff that is very easily measured. And when you have like these kind of priority things, right? Like when you know that you need to complete this in order to complete the task, and once you complete this thing, you can complete like 7 other things. So again, for example, with an essay, once you complete a literature review, you can write a lot of the other parts of the essay. You can create an outline much easier. You need to focus on that thing first, and you spend a lot less time kind of doing other fruitless stuff like formatting or trying to get the paper to look right and stuff like that. You'll just dive straight into the thing that's going to actually make the most progress on the contents of the essay. So now that we've gone over all of that, let me just kind of fully summarize the practical tips section. It was broken up into 2 parts. The first part, we focused on how do you focus better, and the key takeaway from there was focusing on deep work. And the way that you focus on deep work is using time blocking techniques that like Pomodoro technique to take advantage of both your type 1 and your type 2 brain. You also need to lower distractions as much as possible and work in environments that are conducive to getting more focused work done. So you want to be in places where you're not easily going to get distracted, like your home. You don't want to really work with good friends of yours. You want to be able to work alone in kind of a new environment that forces you to only focus on the thing that you're working on. The second part really focuses on picking the right goals, and all of the tips in this section really just kind of tie into each other. The first part is about Parkinson's law, where it says that the amount of time that you give to a task is the amount of time that it will take. So you can use this to your advantage by lowering the amount of time that you give yourself to complete tasks, which will force you to focus on the important things that you need in order to actually complete the task. And the way that we can make it more easy to know what's the most important is using the Pareto principle and understanding that 80% of the results come from 20% of the work we put in. So we can really focus in on that 20% in order to better understand what it is that we need to do to make the most progress. The last two parts of that section focused on kind of prioritization and to-do lists, how you can use to-do lists in order to help you prioritize and make more effective use of Parkinson's law and the Pareto principle. Now that we've understood the practical tips section, we're going to dive into the kind of final leg of the video, which is going to be super short, super simple. It's stuff that everyone knows. It's the long-term tips on how do you increase productivity. I'm going to say these 4 words and you're going to immediately know that they were coming, but here they are: sleep, eating healthy, exercise, and meditation. These 4 things have been proven time and time and time and time and time again to help us get better and to work a lot more efficiently. A lot of people have the common misconception that kind of, if you don't really sleep, or if you sleep a little bit less, you have more time in the day so you can get more done. But again, it's not about the time spent. It's about the quality of time spent. And sleep dramatically increases the quality of time that we have, as does eating healthy, as does exercise, as does meditation, right? But a surprising one that we can kind of focus on, if you kind of accept that all of those things are important, there's like tons of research on those, right? If you want, you can check out the book Rest, which we're actually going to be talking about now because it goes over all of this really well. But rest itself is extremely important. You need to rest in order to get more done. And again, this kind of ties into the thing we talked about with the Pomodoro technique, where when we're resting, we're kind of in that type 2 part of our brain where we're letting our subconscious brain kind of work on things in the background as we're going about our day. And the more high quality rest that we have within our days and in our lives, the more that part of our brain can be turned on, focus on kind of doing problem solving in the background while we go about our day-to-day lives. The more rest we have and the more time we spend just in leisure and stuff like that, the more our brain can work on stuff in the background and make really important novel discoveries for us, so that when we do actually work, the quality of that work is super high because our brain has been doing a ton of stuff in the background for us in order to prepare us for the next focus session that we have. So rest is super important. Have leisure activities, and don't just do leisure activities for the sake of more productivity. Do them because you genuinely enjoy them, and I guarantee your productivity will get a lot better. You can get a lot more done when you're having a lot of fun as well as working. If you want to know more about kind of exercise, rest, and stuff like that, I highly recommend the book Rest, Why We Get More Done When We Work Less. It's one of my favorite books of all time. It has so much cool research. I highly recommend you check it out if you're more interested in how to get the more out of your productivity through rest. So to summarize the whole video, we really can't get that much done within a single day. Our hours are limited, and the amount of time that we can work, is not very high. And the more that we work, after a certain point, it really quickly starts to diminish and add very little to our productivity. And at certain points, when we work past certain numbers of hours, we actually get less work done rather than more. So how do we maximize this limited amount of time that we're given? There's 2 kind of ways we can do this. We can do this by focusing really deeply on our work when we're working. And 2, when we're focusing deeply, we want to make sure that we're focusing on the right things. The things that make the most progress for us towards our goals. And in the long term, what we want to do is exercise, eat healthy, sleep, meditate, and relax. Relaxing is really good for our productivity, for our health, and our happiness. I hope that this video helped. Thank you so much for watching, and take care.